Last year, the U.S. exported more than 950 million tons of plastic waste meant for recycling.
We are talking about a garbage barge that's packing 1,500 tons of trash. It has spent years festering on a dock in the Philippines amid a dispute over its handling.
Take a look at the chasing arrows symbol stamped on any plastic packaging. It is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful and successful marketing icons in human history. It grants us, citizens living in highly developed metropolises, from the bustling districts of Seoul to the wealthy suburbs of California, an absolute sense of moral comfort. Every time you stand at a Gangnam subway station, meticulously peeling off a plastic label before throwing the bottle into a bin, or every time you drop your household waste into a blue recycling cart on a clean street in America, you feel a sense of relief. You tell yourself, I did my part. I followed the rules. I am doing my duty as a civilized citizen to save the planet. We place our absolute trust in an invisible promise that the system will work its magic, that a state-of-the-art facility will melt it down, and that it will be reborn into a clean, brand new product. But behind that comfortable routine and our exemplary daily sorting habits lies a massive, global, systemic failure. The truth is, the perfect recycling loop we've been sold by major corporations exists largely on paper and in public relations campaigns.
What are you doing?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Get out of here, you earth-hating, carbon-farting, unrecyclable garbage person.
As we speak, millions of tons of low-grade, mixed, and non-recyclable plastic waste generated from major economies are quietly being crushed into massive bales. They are loaded into dark shipping containers, stacked onto ocean liners, and sent on a one-way, thousands of miles journey across international waters. Our ultimate destination is not some high-tech domestic recycling hub designed for a circular economy. Instead, they land in crude, informal recycling workshops and toxic, open-air dump sites buried deep within the rural, vulnerable communities of Southeast Asia.
We are talking about a garbage barge that's packing 1,500 tons of trash. It has spent years festering on a dock in the Philippines amid a dispute over its handling.
Why does our modern, sophisticated consumer system rely so heavily on outsourcing its cleanliness to developing nations? Why must keeping our own streets pristine come at the cost of shifting our ecological footprint and toxic burden to the other side of the world? In this video, we are going to expose the brutal reality behind the global recycling myth and confront the uncomfortable truth that the system has been desperately trying to hide from us. To understand why the waste management systems of developed nations choose to export their trash, we must first shatter a common misconception that plastic recycling is an easy, highly lucrative industry. In reality, it is quite the opposite. It is one of the lowest margin, most complex, and expensive business operations in existence. Plastic is not a single uniform material. If you flip over any plastic item, you'll find a tiny recycling triangle numbered 1 through 7. These numbers represent 7 completely distinct groups of polymers, from the PET used in soda bottles and the HDPE in milk jugs, to the PVC in pipes and the LDPE in plastic bags. The ultimate unyielding rule of recycling is this: these plastics cannot be melted down together. Even a tiny fraction of PVC contaminating a batch of PET will instantly ruin the entire melt, turning it into a black, brittle, and utterly worthless sludge. Because of this, before plastic can ever enter any multi-million-dollar automated machinery, it must go through an incredibly labor-intensive process, meticulous sorting and mechanical cleaning. Imagine a plastic bottle arriving at a facility. Workers must manually peel off the paper or plastic label wrapped around the body, separate the cap made of a completely different hard plastic, scrape off the adhesive residue, and most importantly, wash away any leftover dirt, grease, or food particles inside. If these organic contaminants aren't thoroughly removed, bacteria will fester, creating gas pockets that completely destroy the molecular structure of the plastic during the melting process. To this day, no artificial intelligence or robotic arm can sort and clean these items as perfectly as human hands. It requires a massive, relentless volume of manual labor. This is exactly where the economic equation for developed countries completely falls apart. In nations like the United States, labor is exceptionally expensive. Businesses must strictly adhere to minimum wage laws, often ranging from $15 to over $20 an hour. That doesn't even include mandatory expenses like health insurance, workers' compensation, retirement funds, and other social benefits. If a recycling plant in California were to hire hundreds of workers just to sit and unscrew bottle caps, peel off labels, and wash trash for 8 hours a day, the operating costs would instantly skyrocket into the realm of financial fantasy. Calculate the total cost, from collection and electricity to wages and water treatment. The price of a single ton of domestically recycled plastic pellets becomes several times higher than the price of a ton of virgin plastic, which is brand new plastic produced directly from petrochemicals. For packaging companies, buying expensive, domestically recycled plastic is an economic suicide mission. Purely from a commercial standpoint, recycling low-grade plastic in developed nations is a guaranteed money loser. But on the other side of the ocean, in the developing nations of Southeast Asia, this economic equation finds a completely different answer. Here, global waste corporations find the perfect solution to optimize their bottom line: an abundant supply of cheap labor. The daily wage of a waste sorting worker in a Southeast Asian workshop is often less than what a worker in a major US city earns in a single hour. More importantly, driven by economic survival, workers in these small-scale, informal recycling facilities are forced to accept working conditions that no laborer in a developed country would ever tolerate. They work in damp, poorly ventilated sheds, sorting filthy, pathogen-ridden trash from across the globe with their bare hands. They inhale toxic fumes rising from crude melting ovens every single day without standard respiratory protection. For waste management conglomerates, collecting the trash, paying to ship it thousands of miles across the ocean, and handing a small fee to workshop owners in Southeast Asia to handle the dirty work remains vastly cheaper than running a compliant recycling system at home. The cold, calculated logic of the free market automatically flows toward the path of least financial resistance, completely blind to the human cost. Beyond the labor cost equation, the next reason pushing these waste containers away from the shores of developed nations comes from a bitter paradox. The very environmental laws they pride themselves on have indirectly suffocated their domestic recycling industries. For a plastic recycling plant to operate legally in the United States or other advanced economies, businesses must overcome massive regulatory hurdles. The process of recycling plastic is nowhere near as green as people assume. When dirty plastic is washed, millions of gallons of wastewater packed with chemical detergents, heavy metals, oils, and especially microplastics are generated. If this water is dumped directly into nature, it immediately devastates river ecosystems and contaminates groundwater. Furthermore, when plastic is fed into high-temperature melting ovens to create pellets, the process releases a heavy load of toxic emissions, including volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and dioxins. Consequently, developed governments impose incredibly strict technical standards. A recycling facility in the US or Europe is mandated to invest in multi-stage air filtration systems and closed-loop water treatment setups using cutting-edge technology. These systems demand millions of dollars in upfront capital, along with exorbitant routine maintenance and inspection costs. A single emission or wastewater metric breaching the legal limit can trigger catastrophic financial penalties or the immediate revocation of the operating license. This crushing regulatory pressure creates a profound paradox. To keep their own air breathable and their own waters pristine, wealthy nations have driven domestic recycling operational costs to unviable levels. Local recycling businesses simply cannot survive the financial strain, leading to widespread bankruptcies or downscaling. Thus, an outsourcing solution was born, exporting plastic waste to developing nations in Southeast Asia, where environmental regulations are still evolving, or where enforcement and monitoring gaps exist due to a lack of regulatory resources. When these waste containers are cleared into small, informal workshops in Southeast Asia, the owners usually keep only the high-value plastics. The rest, a massive volume of low-grade, heavily contaminated plastic that is impossible to recycle, is dealt with in the most primitive ways, burned illegally under the cover of night or dumped into makeshift landfills. Toxic smoke billows into the sky, while hazardous leachate seeps directly into the farmland and groundwater of poor, rural villages. Developed nations achieve their goal. They keep their own countries pristine and boast beautiful recycling collection rates on paper, all by transferring the entire ecological burden and toxic aftermath to poorer nations. If labor costs and environmental standards act as the push factors, turning waste into a burden that developed nations desperately want to shed, then the global maritime logistics and supply chain network is the pull factor, creating a high-speed corridor straight to Southeast Asia. There's an ironic reality here. The boom of globalization and one-way trade flows has inadvertently turned plastic waste into a commodity with ridiculously cheap shipping rates. Southeast Asia and China have long been dubbed the factories of the world. Every single day, tens of thousands of mega cargo ships carrying millions of containers packed with goods, from apparel and footwear to electronics and household appliances, depart from major Asian ports, bound for massive consumer markets in North America and Europe. Once they dock at US or European ports, these containers are unloaded and distributed to retail chains. And at that exact moment, ocean carriers face a massive logistical headache: empty containers. Because developed nations primarily import consumer goods and export very little raw or bulk material back to Asia, a staggering volume of containers are left completely empty after delivery. If shipping lines accept hauling these empty containers back to Asia just to reposition them for the next cargo season, they still must pay for fuel, port fees, and crew operations as usual. Sailing an empty container halfway across the globe is a colossal waste of resources and a revenue nightmare for any maritime shipping conglomerate. To minimize these losses, carriers slash the rental prices of return trip containers to rock-bottom rates, practically giving them away. They desperately need anything to fill those void spaces, as long as someone pays a nominal fee to offset the return voyage's fuel costs. And the one commodity that is always available, high in volume, completely durable, and sitting on every Western street corner is scrap waste. This perfect misalignment creates a logistical paradox. The cost of trucking a container of waste over land from the American heartland to a domestic port can actually be more expensive than ocean freighting that exact same container thousands of miles across the Pacific to a port in Southeast Asia. Plastic waste suddenly became the ultimate filler cargo on return trip voyages. It resolves the deadweight dilemma for international shipping lines while providing waste management firms with an incredibly cheap escape route. Instead of funding expensive domestic incineration or landfilling, they simply crush the trash, pack it into containers, starving for return cargo, and let the ocean take care of the rest. This transoceanic waste flow operated smoothly like a well-oiled money machine for decades. But in 2018, a geopolitical and environmental earthquake erupted. China, the nation once dubbed the world's dumping ground, decided to slam its doors shut.
Now, China's recent decision to ban solid waste
But China
import.
says it's not taking in that garbage anymore, a decision that has changed the way countries around the world have to handle their waste.
Prior to this historic milestone, China imported more than half of the world's total plastic waste. Its massive recycling mills devoured everything from developed economies, turning it into cheap raw materials to feed its booming manufacturing sector. However, the environmental toll became too devastating to ignore. Recognizing the imminent threat of ecological collapse, the Chinese government officially implemented the National Sword policy, declaring an absolute ban on the import of most low-grade recyclable plastics from abroad. This abrupt ban dealt a catastrophic blow to the waste management systems of wealthy nations. Millions of tons of plastic waste in the US, the UK, and South Korea suddenly became homeless. Domestic sorting centers overflowed, and waste management firms spiraled into a panic. But trash does not just vanish from the earth, it simply seeks the path of least legal resistance. As China's doors slammed shut, the tidal wave of waste immediately rerouted, crashing into nations with looser regulations right next door, Southeast Asia. Within a matter of months, major seaports in Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam witnessed an unprecedented phenomenon. tens of thousands of shipping containers packed with plastic scrap from the West and developed Asian nations flooded the docks. Plastic waste imports to the region surged exponentially, paralyzing major maritime hubs under the weight of thousands of unclaimed containers sitting stranded under the sun, waiting for customs clearance. Accompanying the legal influx was an explosion of smuggling rings and unlicensed, informal recycling workshops popping up like mushrooms. In many rural areas across Southeast Asia, lush green rice fields were transformed into colossal, open-air dump sites overnight. Unregulated operators set up crude melting ovens, spewing thick, acrid black smoke into residential areas and dumping chemical wastewater directly into local waterways. Facing the imminent threat of becoming the new global, toxic dumping ground, Southeast Asian nations realized they could no longer trade their citizens' health for a fraction of scrap profits. A powerful wave of pushback emerged. Governments aggressively tightened legal frameworks, erected strict technical barriers, and resolutely refused to clear substandard shipments. Some nations even took hardline diplomatic actions, sealing and shipping hundreds of contaminated containers back to their countries of origin. It was a defiant, unequivocal message to the developed world. The era of effortlessly outsourcing pollution to Southeast Asia is officially over. The export of plastic waste from developed economies to Southeast Asia is the ultimate proof that our current global circular economy model is fundamentally broken. Wealthy nations refuse to recycle their low-grade plastic domestically, not because they lack the technological prowess, but because the current economic layout permits them to use financial leverage to purchase cleanliness for their own backyard, at the direct expense of the health and environment of poorer nations. But waste and chemical toxins do not carry passports. Plastic, illegally burned in a makeshift Asian village, releases dioxins and CO2 into the very same atmosphere that the entire human race breathes. Plastic dumped into Southeast Asian rivers rides the ocean currents to devastate the global marine ecosystem, ultimately returning to the human dinner plate in the form of microplastics. Whether you live in a high-rise apartment in Seoul or a luxury estate in California, instead of looking for new loopholes to pass the buck to developing nations, the only sustainable path forward is for developed nations to take full ownership of the waste they generate. The system must invest aggressively in automated recycling tech, enforce strict extended producer responsibility on corporations, and most importantly, drastically curb plastic consumption at the source. Because on this planet, no nation owns an isolated landfill. We share the same atmosphere, the same ocean, and ultimately the same destiny.